This is Duke University.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce our first guest of the year for the Distinguished Speaker Series, Mr. Sam Allen, Chairman and CEO of Deere Company. Mr. Allen joined Deere after graduating from Purdue University in 1975 with a bachelor's degree in industrial management. During his 41-year career at Deere, he has worked in positions of increasing responsibility in the Consumer Products Division, Worldwide Construction and the Forestry Division, John Deere Power Systems, and the Worldwide Agricultural Division. He's managed operations in Latin America, China, East Asia, and Australia. Having served as a senior officer in the company since 2001, he was named Chairman and CEO in February 2010. Mr. Allen is the director of the Whirlpool Corporation and serves as the chairman of the U.S. Council of Competitiveness. Please join me in giving Mr. Allen a warm Fuqua welcome.
Thank you very much. Sam, it's great to have you back on campus. It's a real privilege for all of us to be able to hear from you. So the place I want to start is this 41-year career. It's a little bit unusual these days for someone to stay in the same company for that length of time. And I know from talking to you in the past that maybe you might have thought about leaving, but things always kept challenging you. But I'm wondering, in terms of thinking through this question of, do you stay or do you go? Because that's an issue that everyone in the audience is going to be working through as they get through their careers. How do you sort through that challenge of, do I stay on this path with this company, or do I stay within the company and try to get on a different path, or do I leave?
Well, my answer to that right now will probably be different than it was as I went through that. And I think as I was going through that, there were times, first off, we are a cyclical company, as we've talked about, so there were times when things were very difficult, and it behooved you to look. I remember when I started in 1975, we had 67,000 employees. In the mid-'80s, we only had 32,000 employees. And so you were thinking a lot about, should you stay even because of the opportunities, et cetera. And I did interview more than one time with companies and had job offers. And what I found out about myself, which I think a lot of Deere people end up finding out as they go through this, is I just didn't want to leave the people and the culture of the company. And as I would look at some of these other companies, at least for me, they just didn't seem to have the same deep-rooted conviction, commitment to integrity, the way our company over its now 179-year history has had, and the interpersonal relationships that are developed amongst it. So literally, it was about not wanting to leave the people. And as I mentioned to you, we normally say that if we keep you 3 years, we can keep you forever. And it's, again, it's about, it takes you a couple of years to figure out whether this culture is for you or not. But once you assimilate into the company, it's one that I think most people feel very, very good about, both because of how we operate and also because of our customer base. We get to work with people that, as we say, are linked to the land. They're the true salt of the earth, and you're helping people feed the world, shelter the world, and all those things, I think, build an environment that you just become very passionate about. And as time goes on, you get more and more passionate, and before you know it, you got 41 years.
So clearly you made the right choice over those 41 years, because look at where you are today. You're in that CEO position. But did you ever have a point in that career progression where you felt like you had hit a dead end or you'd been derailed? And if so, what happened, and how did you make your way back into the game?
There was a point, I'd answer that in two different ways. Probably one of the best things that happened for me, maybe a third of the way through my career, I worked for a extremely tough boss, but I didn't appreciate the degree to which he really thought highly of me. And I, like a lot of people, were really focused on, well, if you're going to go here, you set a progression of, okay, then I need to be here by this date and all this type of thing. And while I always went to work every day thinking about doing the best job I could on that day, you still, when people around you know that you're thinking about something else instead of thinking about them, that's not a very good and healthy spot to be in. And so he just really hammered that out of me, and really hammered me out of it. And then from then on, it was all about, okay, in the job, do the best possible job, don't worry about the rest. And I can tell you that over the last probably 5 or 6 jobs that I had, I tried to turn down the next one. I didn't try to turn this one down, but before that, because I was really enjoying what I was doing and felt I was making a meaningful difference, and I didn't need that other type of assignment. And of course, I didn't know at the time that part of that was developing me to maybe have the opportunity for this job. But the only time I really felt derailed was back at that point in time, and it wasn't that it was derailed, it was more that I wasn't moving as fast as I perceived a lot of others were moving. And the other thing I learned from that, it's not about the job, it's about the experience. And don't worry so much about the position, worry about the experiences that you are getting. And so over time, that became easier and easier to accept and then to move forward with. And over the last 2/3 of my career, I've not at any point in time felt like, gosh, what's going on here? Why am I not moving?
Yeah. So I've heard you urge graduates to be more humble, to embrace humility, and I think you've actually said that confidence and humility are positively correlated, not negatively correlated. And in fact, you're one of the most humble people I've ever known, especially in kind of comparison to the actual accomplishment that you have every reason to brag, and yet you're so humble. So the question is, when you embrace humility, how do you get noticed?
Well, I think there's still a number of things that can allow both of those to happen. First off, getting noticed is a lot about results. And the idea that you're humble doesn't mean you still don't let results speak for themselves. And that can have a major impact on that. I think you can get in rooms if you're, well, let me put it this way. As you move up in a company, everybody knows who you are because of your position. The fact then that you act in a more humble fashion, I think gets you noticed even more because you're not wearing it on your sleeve. So I think, early on, that may not be the case, but as you move up, it becomes easier to have being humble actually help you be getting noticed by whether your employees or associates, peers, whatever the case may be. But I think it's all about what I call walking the talk, and delivering results and how you deliver those results. And if you do that well, I think you'll get noticed, for sure.
Okay. So when you became CEO, you said there are 3 things that you wanted to focus on. One was kind of traditional, which was you wanted to double sales and profits. And then the next two were perhaps less traditional. So the second one was that you're going to create an environment where all employees felt they could grow personally and professionally to their fullest. Mm-hmm. And then the third one was, we're going to give back to society commensurate with the good fortune that we have. And so those are your top three goals. So let's jump to number two to start with. So how did you choose that? Why did that become one of your three imperatives after becoming CEO? And then how did you bring it to life?
So part of it, I'm a big believer in employee engagement. And if you have a highly aligned, engaged workforce, it's not 1.5, 2 times, it's 5, 10 times more effective than that that's not highly engaged or highly aligned. And when you pull that back about, okay, what drives engagement, there's a leadership component that comes out of your manager or leader that really will drive it. You've got to believe in what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And then you've got to feel like the organization manager are really thinking about you, caring about you. And for me, that then translates into how do I say that? And for me, that is, I want you to be able to professionally and personally develop to your fullest here. And what we liked about that, in addition to it, is that then the third component of giving back had a large component in volunteerism, which is another way to allow you to develop fully, both personally and professionally. So we were able to keep those so that there was a good overlap between them that made a lot of sense to us and hopefully to our people.
And did you ever receive any pushback from shareholders about, well, what about maximizing shareholder value, and are you being distracted from that goal by focusing on these other items?
No, because the first one was we're going to realize the John Deere strategy, which had everything that a shareholder would want in the short term. I think the other two are about also what a shareholder wants in the long term for sustainability. And the way we articulate it, that is, and we try to make sure people don't get confused, because whether we're talking about the personal development or whether we're talking about volunteerism and all of that, there are people that like to gravitate to that first and say, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you help this person? Why don't you use all your resources for this? And we come back and say that, no, the absolute first responsibility we have in terms of our social commitments is we got to go run a great company. Because the absolute worst thing that could happen is if we're not financially strong, and we end up having to close plants or even worse than that, the company goes under, that's the worst thing that can happen in terms of our social commitment. So first and foremost, we want to run a strong, healthy company. But what we also want to be very clear, while that is necessary, it is not sufficient to be a great company. We also need to be able to assure our employees are maximizing their talents, and we've also got to be sure that we're giving back commensurate with the success that we generate.
Another way that you talk about some of these same issues is the sense of purpose that you've tried to instill within Deere, and the sense of belonging and unity that it creates within the company. So if I pick someone at random from Deere, what would they say is their purpose?
I would hope, because we've invested a lot of time in this.
Should we pick on someone randomly? No.
We start right at the top of our strategy. Our higher purpose is we're committed to those linked to the land, and through that, we want to enable human flourishing. And those linked to the land include those that feed the world, those that shelter the world, those that work the land. And that has resonated. I think that was always a part of Deere, but prior to rolling out the strategy in 2010, we really didn't have it formally articulated. And I think that's helped galvanize all of us to know that, okay, we're not just about making tractors and four-wheel drive loaders. We are about providing farmers, contractors, whatever, the capabilities to do a better job of meeting the needs of whether it be food production or whether it be shelter.
So you've talked about the thing that you like best about being CEO is seeing the pride that people have in the broad community, employees, customers, and so on, in what it is that Deere can accomplish. Does that pride, I mean, how do you build that pride in the company? And is it something that's really intentional on your part?
It is intentional. I think the biggest advantage we have is we're now 179, soon to be 180 years old. We have a lot of people that are multi-generational experiences with us. You try to create situations where those almost tribal stories get told that further reinforce it. The other advantage we have in a lot of ways would be that whether you're an employee working in a factory, you're probably out in the factory, you're going to talk to somebody that's a second or third generation worker that's going to talk about, this is what Deere means to me. If you're somebody that is in sales, you're going to have that in spades, talking to our dealers and talking to our customers. And so there's the broader enterprise in that sense has so much of that in place. It's a matter of just trying to get our people exposed to that. And the more we get them exposed to that, the more they understand that there's something really special here.
Yeah. So you're in a cyclical business, and as CEO, you've had some great years where things all look really nice, and recently you've had some tough years. Mm-hmm. How do you maintain that pride and sense of purpose when the going gets tough, as it has been, and looks like it's not going to turn really positive for maybe another year or so?
Yeah. So we have, after my first year in the job, the next 4 years were the 4 highest net income years in the history of the company. And now we're going to have, at the end of 16, will be the 3rd year in a row of revenue reduction, this is only the 3rd time this has happened in my 41-year career. And it does happen. It doesn't happen very often. The challenge you have right now, and I mentioned this earlier when we talked, we have 43% of our salaried workforce that has started with us since 2010. So they saw all these really great years, and now they're having to live through this for the first time, and they're wondering, what's caused this? In concept, they understand we're a cyclical company, but when you go from 120% of capacity down to 50% of capacity or 30% of capacity, all of a sudden that concept is harder to understand. And so what you really try to do is you try to make sure, first and foremost, during times like this, you want ensure people stay committed to the how, the integrity piece. You can't let that slip, and you try to re-emphasize that more and more. Second, you try to make sure people understand why we're having to do the near-term things that we have to do and how that will benefit us over the long term. But equally important is you try to share with people, but here are all the other investments we're making that will assure that as we come out of this, and we will come out of this, and the tailwinds will start back up, that we've made our sales even bigger, and we'll be able to accelerate our growth even faster than what it was as we entered this. And then you have to demonstrate that. You have to find ways of letting people see that so that they believe you, that it's not words, that it's actions. And so we've stayed very committed to R&D, for example, and continue to invest a lot of money in that area. We've stayed very committed. We haven't shut any plants down, other than one in China that we weren't using anyway. And so we've been committed to our growth objectives. We've been committed to our key investments to grow our product portfolio and everything. We try to make sure people see that.
So John Deere is an iconic American brand, but it's more than an American company, it's a global company. And as a consequence, because you're such a high-profile brand within this country, how are you dealing with the current environment where politicians on all sides are essentially saying we're not so sure about this model of how the global economy works around the concepts of free trade?
Yeah, there's a couple different parts I wouldn't mind commenting on that. There's the free trade piece, and then there's just the concept of how you're dealing with it as a large Fortune 100 company that right now, it's not, Fortune 100 companies are not perceived all that well in a lot of circles. On the trade deal, clearly we're a strong believer, have always been a strong believer in free trade. And we know that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement would be very, very good for agriculture. And that obviously is the biggest part of our business. And we've tried to help people appreciate that. I think the advantage we have, and we never want to lose it, is when we're in Washington, when we're in either side of the aisle, they will ask us for our opinion because they know that John Deere will give the straight opinion, not a nuanced opinion or a one that is politicized. And so trying to be factual about here are the benefits, here's how we see it, and trying to make sure that you don't let that get played by either side to the detriment of the other side is the challenge that you keep working on this. And that's the same thing as a Fortune 100 company. You know, you're trying to always, we tell all our employees, you know, it's the Wall Street Journal test. If tomorrow morning we woke up and something was written about us in the Wall Street Journal, no matter what we're doing, where we're doing it, we'd want it to be good and that we could explain it. And you're trying to, in times like this, it just puts even more pressure that you try to stay above the fray and that you try to demonstrate through your actions that you're trying to do the best things and in the right way.
So Jeff Immelt from GE has been very outspoken about feeling under attack by various politicians from all sides, mm-hmm. and also feeling that this model that we have been teaching in business schools for many years around how we can grow the global economy, I mean, he's saying that it's changing the GE strategy, that this rise of nationalism is leading GE to make fundamentally different decisions about how they're going to deploy their resources. Do you feel like you're having to respond in a way where you're changing your strategy, just acknowledging that times are changing?
I don't think so. Well, I would put it this way: if the environment under which we took off on some of these global growth initiatives in 2010, if we were now looking at it today and we were just starting to do this, we certainly would have gone at a much slower pace in Russia and in China. But we still, when we go do something like that, we're looking at it with an eye towards 20, 30 years down the road. And so, for example, in Russia, there's some people that say, well, why don't you just shut down and get out of there? Well, we don't, because we're going to have to double food output by 2050. Russia has 12, 13% of the arable land, and we're not going to feed the world without Russian agriculture being a key component of that breadbasket. So at some point in time, that is going to be a big and good market for agriculture. And you're not going to be able to come in at the end and knock on the door and say, okay, now we're ready to come in here. So during this time period, it's about how do you keep your assets in place, but retrench and keep it lean so it isn't costing you dearly to stay in it. The nationalistic part, probably the biggest concern, that is a concern. I think the biggest concern for us, quite frankly, is the U.S. Not that it isn't going on in other markets, but for us, 50+% of our sales are U.S. And so it's so important, and whether it be things that cause us not to be able to export as freely from the U.S., or whether it has an impact on some of our markets here that cause us not to be able to sell as much equipment here. That's certainly something we're always looking at, but at least up to this point in time, I have not envisioned a situation where, whether it be capital deployment or whether it be our human resources, how we're organized, all of that, that we would let what's going on right now fundamentally change our approach.
Yeah. So we talked about the example of Brexit and how 85% of the business community supported staying in the EU, and yet the majority of the population rejected that advice. You also wear this hat as the chair of the Council on Competitiveness. How does business get its voice back and get people to listen to the expertise that it can share in an environment where people seem to want to reject that advice and instead blame business as the source of all woes in the world?
Well, one of the advantages with being chair of the Council on Competitiveness, if you go to DC, whether you're either side of the aisle, they will tell you that the Council on Competitiveness is definitely focused on the long-term competitiveness of the U.S., and it is not political. In fact, some of the fellows on the council, there are retired Democratic senators and retired Republican senators that are on the council. And so that group genuinely, in my heart of hearts, I believe, they're trying to do what's best for America over the long term. I think a vehicle like that is a more effective vehicle in these times than any one company could be, because the people there have demonstrated over time, this is their 30th year, that they're all about just what's good policy for America. And I would suggest in times like this, it's even more important to try to focus on that type of organization, because I just don't, you take a long time to build your reputation, and it can be ruined in a one act, and then it takes a long time to build it back up. And I do think corporate America it's going to take a lot of time as a whole. There will be individual companies that will be doing well and will be well thought of, but as a whole, I don't think we should think that one or two good acts is going to cause this to change in the near term.
Yeah. I know that for you personally and for Deere as a company, integrity is at your core in terms of how you conduct business around the world. How do you create a culture where people do live up to the high ethical standards that you have? And can you give an example of when something happened that didn't seem right, and therefore it was a kind of a signal event to make sure people knew this isn't who we are, this is who we need to be?
First off, I would say that the how starts with me and with the leadership team. If we don't display it every day, it's hard to believe everybody else is going to do it. And of course, we have many, many examples where we could kind of deviate a little bit. And if you deviate a little bit, that's a signal everybody else can deviate a lot. So it's important to continue to reinforce it from that perspective. An example that did go the right way, and then we try to celebrate these, is back in 2012, we built our second tractor plant in India in a place called Devas. And the permitting took 9 months longer than it was supposed to. And the reason it took 9 months longer than it was supposed to is they were trying to get us to pay bribes. And our Indian team wouldn't pay bribes. And we had people that would go to the permitting office in the morning, and they'd sit there all day, and they would leave in the afternoon and say, is the permit ready? No. And they would smile and say, thank you, I'll be back tomorrow. Well, finally, after 9 months, and this wasn't just one permit, but through the whole process, John Deere got the reputation of being the smiling company. And as a result of that, they said, don't even try to get them to pay a bribe. They won't pay a bribe. So you have to take those type of situations and really celebrate them and reinforce it with others. The one I'll tell you that it just came up not long ago, and our board even asked the question when the VW scandal came out. We're a huge manufacturer of diesel engines. And one of the questions was, could this ever happen at John Deere? And not just me, the whole senior leadership team said, no way, could never happen. And we even cited an example a couple of mission cycles earlier where the emissions test, the way it was written, said you would only have to be in compliance on these 12 points on the mode. We went to the EPA and said, this is what the rules state. Is this really what you mean? And they said, oh, no. We want you to be over the whole operating cycle. And we were just giving those as reference points. Well, that's not how the rule's written. And so they ended up changing the rules. We were the first company to point that out. Some others ended up having to pay a fine, even though in retrospect they really didn't do anything wrong. They just didn't speak up. Mm-hmm. So it is an important component of what the closest I can give you to, and we didn't do something wrong, but it was a tension in the system, is we were importing parts into Russia to our factory. You get them to the factory, and then what ends up happening, let's say you're supposed to have 100. Well, we sometimes had 99 or we had 101. Well, the way the Russian rules are written, you're in trouble when that happens. And there's no way to come back and say, okay, I've got 99, instead I shouldn't have paid as much duty, or I've got 101, I should pay more duty. And the on-the-ground ruling in Russia that was given to us was, we know it's a problem with the rules. Everybody has this, and they just ignore it. And we said, this can't be right. Can't be right. And the penalties were very onerous. I mean, it could have been some of our people thrown in jail. So we actually went around through other contacts, got 2 top officials in the Russian government. They acknowledged that they had a problem. They were going to be working on it. They asked us to send in a letter of what we were going to be doing about it and assured us that there would not be an issue as a result of that. That's an example where I'm going to tell you, we wrestled with that one back and forth.
But you took the extra steps to make it right.
We did.
Yeah. Switching gears.
Yeah.
So again, people think of John Deere as this iconic brand, and so with that comes very strong associations, and they surely think of you as a manufacturing company that's making things that have been around for a long, long time. But you're really a technology company, and you're remaking the company around big data. Can you talk about what your aspirations are in terms of how you really change the nature of the company?
Yeah, so first off, I think it'd be surprising to a lot of people that we have the equivalent of about 4,200 software programmer types throughout the company, which if you go look at Silicon Valley and a lot of other places, that would stack up pretty well compared to a lot. And a majority of these are working either in embedded software on the machine, or they're working in this space of precision ag. And what we're literally, and we're within 5 years, I think, of going to be there. We have gone from, I'm just planting a crop across a whole 100-acre field, to I am planting an individual seed and treating an individual seed, and I'm taking data from that individual seed in that piece of soil right there, and I will manage that 100-acre field one seed at a time. And I'll do that because when I manage it seed by seed, I can improve my productivity, my yields by a significant amount that allows me to become even more cost effective. And so we're enabling that through sensor technology on our machines, through telematic solutions, through GPS, putting it all up into the cloud, into what we call the operations center that then takes all that data. And now what we're working on is doing the big data analysis, that how do we take all this field data and from it do the data analysis that drives insights, and then giving that to our farmer customers so that they can then continue to change their prescription in a fashion that allows them to become more and more effective going forward.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna ask one more question, and then I'm gonna open it up to the audience. So just as a heads up, so you get ready. As you transition the company in that way to I think you said something, you want to be the Microsoft
operating system of precision ag.
Yeah, and so this whole trend to precision agriculture, you want to lead the way. A number of companies that have made that kind of transition find it challenging because as you're making that transition, you've got your existing business built around some core products where people feel like, well, I'm less exciting, I'm less important to the future. How do you make sure that within your entire team you create the sense of urgency around you do have to remake the company and take advantage of opportunities, while at the same time making everybody feel like they're a part of it, even if they're working on kind of an older line of the business?
I think the good thing for most of the product platforms, a lot of this enables that product platform to generate even more superior results. And so if they're able to see that helping them be even a higher level of best-in-class product, you can keep people going there. I think the bigger challenge for us, if you take our integrated solutions group, which is the group that really works on the telematics, the software, and all of that, there's about, just that group alone, there's about 1,200 engineers, programmers in that. You've got a group that's doing an embedded software for a tractor, where the first time you write the software, it's got to be absolutely right. You can't come back and say, well, I'm going to issue a patch, download it the next day. If the tractor doesn't shift right or whatever, that's a huge issue. So that's a totally different type of application development than over in this other area where you're now putting stuff into the cloud and then onto an iPad, and it's an app that's letting that farmer end up see how he's planting, et cetera. There you're accustomed to, and people want it quickly, and they don't want the 18-month development cycle that makes it perfect over here. They want the 2-month development cycle that gets it out here and it's good enough, and then you keep updating it. And the culture of development under those two has got to be totally, totally different. And we still, at some point in time, know that probably this group is more and more going to end up being on the West Coast because it's more of a Silicon Valley type function, where this function over here will stay. But that's something we're wrestling with, and it's about when is the right time to really move some of that. But we know that to make this work effectively, more and more we've got to keep separating these two because they're very, very different development cycles.
Interesting. Okay. So, from the audience.
Good evening. My name is Wade Checketts. I appreciate you sharing information about your own personal career. You've stayed at the company for a long time. Can you tell us about an experience or a set of experiences of when, even though you loved what you were doing, it was time to move on to a different responsibility so you could keep yourself engaged?
I think in terms of keeping myself engaged, it was more, I can give you a really good one on that. It was 1986, 87, fall of 86. This was at the height of Deere being down, and I had a chance to go as a part of the Deere side to Detroit to be a part of what we called DDEC, the Detroit Deere Corporation. We were combining the diesel engine business of Deere along with the diesel engine business of Detroit Diesel Allison into a new joint venture. And I went there, and 6 months, almost to a day after we got there, we chose to break it off. Because as we learned more and more about what was going on up there, we discovered more and more about cost issues and things like that that was not going to allow this company to be financially viable. And Deere at that time was so weak that if this company were not financially viable, even though it was smaller, it would have taken us under. So I went back to Deere, and I went back in April of 87. And then I didn't have a job again until August, September of 87. And that was a time period that I mean, I can remember today. My wife would say, I was one that I grew up in the factory, so I was at work at 5:30 in the morning, normally not home till 6 o'clock at night. I would be coming home at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She'd say, "What are you doing home?" There was nothing to do. You know, it was just pure, boring as all get out. And that was also a period of time when I looked to the outside and had an offer and almost took it and just couldn't force myself to leave Deere. The interesting thing about that was then I ended up going to a totally different division in August of that year, our construction forestry division. And then 1 year later, ended up having, with the exception of the job I got now, the most significant promotion of my career, which had I not gone through all that, I would have never had. I happened to be at the right place at the right time, so it worked out. But I can tell you that was 5 months of pure hell.
Hi, my name is Sharam. I have a question. You mentioned in your conversation you mentioned in your conversation that you had a tough boss. So how were you able to win him over? And what advice you would like to share?
So let me put it in a couple different categories there. I would say over my career, 2/3 of my bosses were really, really good, and 1/3 of them were really, really bad. In terms of my development, you probably learn more from a bad boss than you do from good bosses. A lot of times the good bosses, you almost take for granted some of the things they're doing. But when you have a bad boss and you see how it's creating havoc, it's easy for you to say, I'm never going to do what that person's doing. And so I think that's a part of that. This was not a bad boss, this was a tough boss. There's a difference. And this boss really took a significant interest in my development and was one of the people that during my formative development, he's proud of his contribution. He has every right to be proud of it. But what he was able to do through his toughness was get me to focus 100% on doing the job at hand and let others worry about my career development. And once I did that, things, it was a turning point for me.
Here in front.
Mr. Allen, my name is Sri. Thanks for spending time today. My question is, how do you manage your time and how do you prioritize the tasks?
Well, that's an interesting one because I get asked a lot of times, whether it be my employees or whatever, what are the key attributes today to being an effective leader? And one of the, I talk about communication skills. You obviously got to have results orientation. You've got to be able to get people inspired. But I say one of the ones that is critical that a lot of people, not everybody can do, and that is in this information age where you have so much information in front of you. How do you quickly assess what's the 20% that will have 80% of the impact and focus on that 20%? Not on everything else. We'll have people in our management team, they'll have 1,000 emails on their in Outlook, and you're sitting there, how can you do that? I mean, you pretty soon you're just spinning, and it leads to not being effective. So I think one of the most important aspects is being able to really, really understand, okay, what is that 20% that will be critical to me doing what I need to do? Relative to managing my time and also balance on time, I had a very good assistant about 5 jobs ago. And she got with me, I was one I would never put personal time down until the last minute, that type of thing. And even back then, that meant you never took any time, because there's always something coming up. So what we got to do is we went way out there on the calendar. And so if you went right now, my whole organization knows all my trips planned for 2017, where I plan to go, when I plan to go, all of that. I already have my 18 calendar first blush set up. As a part of that, I also say, okay, here's my grandson's birthday. I'm going to try to be gone for that day. Here's my granddaughter's birthday. I'm going to try to be gone for that day. I put them out there and try to then work around it. Now, I have an advantage. There's not many people that can interrupt my schedule. You all don't have that advantage. But what that's why I put them out so early. The 2017 calendar, we put it out back in March, April, and then gave people opportunity to go talk to all their organizations so that we made sure we didn't infringe on people's spring break or special holidays or things like that, and so we could then put it back in. But I think in this environment, if you don't figure out a way to create some space, some time out there, you aren't going to manage your time. It's going to manage you, and that's what I've tried to do. It's worked pretty well, and it just requires a lot of advanced planning. You can't be doing it by the seat of your pants.
Hi, my name's John. You mentioned how volunteerism is a really important piece of your strategy at John Deere. Could you tell us a little bit about your favorite volunteer activity, or one that is really important to the employees at your company?
Now, promise you tell the audience this was not a setup.
It was not a setup.
So I just got back from India last week on a volunteerism effort. That's why I'm saying that. And as a part of this, when we said we wanted to go down this path of giving back, we decided, one of the things we really wanted to do was focus on volunteerism. So in September 2011, we went to the state of Rajasthan in India, and we worked with, actually did a week of working with farmers. So we were on our hands and knees with a sickle cutting beans and corn, and we built mangers and all of that, and got to know the farmers, and they're all small plot owners. So, we're talking people that have 2 acres of land, something like that. And then as a part, and it was 2 things. One, we took a group of about 12 leaders from Deere here, and then our Indian leadership team. We got together and met with them. And then after we got done, we said, okay, now how are we, that was to send a signal to everybody that it was okay to take time off from work and volunteer. And we actually give you paid time off to do that. The second thing then was, okay, now how are we going to take this from just end up volunteering for a week to trying to really create a meaningful impact? So we did work with an NGO to create what we call a joint initiative for village advancement. And we went back here for the 5-year anniversary of that. One of the farmers I again worked in the field a little bit with, I said, okay, if you take the economic value of what you were producing in 2011, and you take what you're producing today because of crop changes, agronomic information that we gave them, everything else, what's the difference? And he said, I'm making 3 times more money today than I was making in 2011. And oh, by the way, in 3 years, when my pomegranate trees are in full bloom, that will go up to 10 times as much. But even more impressive for us was we ended up rebuilding the schools. They didn't have bathrooms. We put in bathrooms and all kinds of things. We went from 40% of the kids dropping out by the 8th grade to 100% of the kids staying in school, and the 40% that dropped out coming back into school. In India, at least in that state, there's a test at the end of the 10th grade that you have to take. 2 years ago, 32% of the kids at the end of the 10th grade passed that test. This year, 83% of them did. So it was just a totally different impact. And, as you might imagine, for all of us that went back, and the whole first team went back, it was truly, we left pumped, completely pumped. And now we're in the process of changing that to where they're almost sustainable, where we won't have to commit any additional resources. And then we're taking it now to other villages. And by the way, the same model works in sub-Saharan Africa, and we're taking it there as well. So it's, those are the ways that you can. It's not like you're impacting millions of people. There are some things we do to try to impact those type of lives through big organizations, but I firmly believe that you need both. You need some of these that are breadth, but then you need some of these that have depth, that are high impact, that you can emotionally come away feeling like you've made a meaningful difference in the lives of those villagers. And that's something that, without you having done that, their life for the rest of their life would have been totally different. So that's what we try to do. We will give you 40 hours, we will give you time off and pay time off. And if you work an additional 40 hours for any NGO that is approved, we'll give you, in your name, we'll put $1,000 into that NGO's fund. So by things like that, we're trying to make sure that we've encouraged people to really step it up And we've seen our volunteerism numbers go way, way up. And we're on a path that by 2022, we're hoping to have 1 million hours of volunteerism.
Hi, my name is Burke Anderson. First of all, I just wanted to point out that I've got a friend here who works for John Deere. His name is Matthew McGrady, and I think he'd be a great factory manager. Just so you know.
Just remember, you didn't say where, so we got a lot of factories in a lot of countries.
Actually, that's the question I wanted to ask. In your bio, it was mentioned that you have had responsibility over various international regions. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that experience and how critical that was to your mobility within the organization and ultimately arriving to where you are today.
Yeah, I think, first off, for me, living overseas, I did that early in my life because my dad was in the military. And so I spent 6 years in Germany and a couple years in England, places like that. I actually have not lived overseas with Deere. When I ran all of that, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Oceania, China, it didn't matter where you lived. I think my first year, we counted, I was on the road 272 days. And so, my office was seat 5C in an airplane somewhere, going wherever. But you still interacted a lot. At that time, we were organized differently, and I had total responsibility, factory, marketing, sales, everything for all those regions. So you would spend 2 weeks on the road at a time in a region, and you'd get to know the people extremely well. And I think in terms of understanding diverse cultures, that experience is invaluable. It helps you think differently than even when you come back here. We did at one time, our thinking in our management development was that to move up above a certain level, that it was almost required that you live abroad. We've moved away from that. We think you can get experiences like what I got that can help. And we really look at it on an individual level. Is this an individual that almost has to immerse themselves even more through an overseas assignment to really get the benefit of what we're trying to do in terms of their leadership and development? Or is this someone that has a lot of that already, and just by making sure they get exposure, that they can develop? And the second reason, quite frankly, especially at times like this, expat assignments are just tremendously expensive. And it's not that we wouldn't invest on our end in putting that person there, but we have a lot of challenged markets overseas. And if you're, for example, in China, and you're trying to find every way you can to save $1,000, and then all of a sudden you have a Chinese national that you can put on board for $20,000 a year in a leadership position, mid-management, or you can fly in this expat and it's costing you $1 million a year by the time you put all the expat charges. You talk about demotivating. It really is demotivating to the team that's trying to turn their business around when you have that delta difference. So that's the other thing that influences when we do some of the developing or not, is the timing of what's going on in the markets and what other signals are we sending. But clearly, one way or another, you need to get a lot of exposure in developing markets overseas.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Allen. I know the audience enjoyed hearing about your experiences, and here's a little bit of a token of appreciation.
Thank you.
For your time. Thank you.